Finally, the new limited job Beastmaster we were teased when Dawntrail was revealed is coming to Final Fantasy XIV. And the existing limited job, Blue Mage, is for the first time since its addition getting straight up skipped in regards to updates for the final major patch of Dawntrail. Final Fantasy XIV is a game filled to the brim with various different types of content, each different from each other. Different enough that each niche might require its own dedicated attention and development to stay up to date. And while occasionally changes in one category affects another, most of the time the effect is minor when the particular niche isn't the target of the change. And it gets even crazier still when we realize that even in some of the bigger types of content, there are niches in those types of content that indeed require individual attention. This, combined with that initial announcement that a new limited job is accompanied by the existing one being put on hold, begs the question, is Final Fantasy XIV spreading itself too thin? When it comes to perpetually updated, live service games, unless the game is so specialized that there is only one thing you can do in the game, attention being given to one part of the game may feel like it must come at the expense of ignoring another part of the game. Whether it's the clash between PvE and PvP content in an MMO, extra attention being given to a role or a specific character in a MOBA or a hero shooter, meaning that your character isn't receiving that attention, exaggeration of course, something being added in one place is often assumed to come at the cost of something else being ignored. In a sufficiently large development team though, this is simply not how things work. Graphical updates or even visually impressive additions to the game might not cost anything from the category you are interested in, since they might be made by different parts of the team. As long as the team needs X amount of people to maintain and manage Y amounts of types and categories of content, as long as the day-to-day covers no more than Y stuff, and maybe only on special occasions includes a little extra thing, this is perfectly manageable. But if the stuff that needs maintaining and managing ever surpasses this magical Y number of stuff, well, then either more people will be needed to maintain the content that is there, or something must be left behind or cancelled. Or, crunch is a thing, but that is much more like a symptom of the actual problem than a solution. When it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, in some places we have a surprising amount of insight or information in regards to how the development was planned out. In a lot of other places, we have to make a lot of guesses based on the information we do have. And when it comes to the question of spreading too thin, and perhaps even economy, we may be able to make some reasonably educated guesses based on what actually has happened over the years. Final Fantasy XIV Online, also known as 1.0, was developed with a concerning level of confidence, which is to say a lot of mistakes were made and ignored during development with the confidence of, well, we make Final Fantasy, we know best, leading to a game that perhaps felt a bit like a tangent to Final Fantasy XI with the added bonus of incredible performance issues, but man did the game look nice. Eventually, Yoshi P was put on the case of saving the game, and the solution was to keep updating the existing game for a while they essentially speedran remaking 14 as A Realm Reborn simultaneously, eventually taking down the 1.0 servers with a bang to then focus on finishing up on that 2.0. Except when A Realm Reborn was made, they then had to continue this uphill battle to make their first expansion, Heavensward 3.0, in a reasonable time frame to keep the momentum going. While, as I recall, the wording has been a bit vague on the specifics on this, it sort of gives the implication that the 14 development team was on a constant kind of crunch of some magnitude from the moment Yoshi P came on board to around the time 3.0 precisely was made and finished. At the very beginning of A Realm Reborn, the patch release cadence of 14 was major patch roughly every 3 to 4 months, with minor additions for the months in between, meaning, for example, that a major patch in January meant a minor addition in February and March, and then a major patch around April or May. Expansions also followed this trend of releasing maybe around 5 months after the final major update. Sometime in Shadowbringers, it was announced that the patch cadence would be switched to every 4 to 5 months instead of every 3 to 4. And what stands out here is that as this change was to reduce the burden on the development team, the added time between patches didn't mean more content per patch drop. And with an extra month or so to experience what each patch has to offer, it really makes it a lot more visible when a new major patch didn't add anything that you personally might be super invested in. And due to the consistent design of 14 major patches and expansions content additions, there is quite a lot of stuff that fits in that Y magic number from before. A set minimum number of dungeons, raids, trials, alliance raids, and even ultimates to some degree. And then there's all the other stuff on top. Every time a new type of niche has been introduced into 14, it leaves some level of expectation to keep adding to it. Shadowbringers didn't have a new deep dungeon, why not? Endwalker didn't have a field operation, why not? And so Dawntrail has both, of course. But at least these types of additions are mostly one and done. Every time a new job is added, a new weapon is needed for those deep dungeons and whatnot. And speaking of jobs, some additions come with an attached permanent commitment to its continued support. Since the release of A Realm Reborn, we have more than doubled the amount of combat jobs in the game. Hypothetically, if the job design and balance team was the same people in A Realm Reborn to now, with no further additions, then they would have more than twice the work to deal with. Some of the more veteran players often complain that the jobs we have today are much simpler than what they were back in, say, Stormblood or Heavensward. On the one hand, a lot of the complexity of the jobs back then came from weird and wacky actions that barely mattered for the rotation, but be there they must, and much less streamlined designs that had a vague idea of where they wanted to go but weren't sure yet. On the other hand, with less jobs to keep track of, you'd probably feel more inclined to try something crazy and wild. On the third hand, working on a specific kind of design for over a decade, you'd probably start working your way into a specific kind of idea that seems to work. However, whether the job streamlining has anything to do with the game spreading itself too thin is hard to say for certain, but it wouldn't be the only place where, perhaps, good enough, quote-unquote, is what is given to some content to make time for the more exciting content. Stormblood was the last expansion where more than 2 optional dungeons were added, and also the last expansion that included an optional leveling dungeon. At the same time, we have clear evidence that once an optional dungeon stops being currently relevant, most players lose interest in even unlocking the dungeon to begin with. So why bother making it? Shadowbringers was the third, but also last expansion to include an optional trial boss trilogy. Yet, a similar observation of it sort of turning into niche content happened. To be fair, we still get the same amount of trials, they're just part of the MSQ instead now. I could possibly keep listing examples, but I think you get the point. Where it gets more concerning to me is when it comes to niches that don't have an as staple slot in the development cycle. Take PvP for instance. It actually gets regular balance patches snuck in with any update to the game at large. These updates apply small changes to both frontline and crisisline conflict, with the former typically getting far more player attention due to being relatively casual and having a daily roulette attached to it, and the latter being considered more dedicated. However, the dedicated PvP player base is so small that anything more niche than that is, whether intentionally or not, left to die. Take Rival Wings, for instance. When it comes to development of an MMORPG like Final Fantasy XIV, unless there is made a concerted effort to toss aside old content and letting it be, or making it clear that a new edition is a one-time thing dedicated to a specific expansion, introducing a new type of content to a game like this sort of comes with the implied expectation that more additions will be made to it. Every new minion added comes with the expectation that the minion is added with stats and effects for the 20 competitive Lord of the Minion players. And even if this old content is cast aside, never to be expanded upon again, it still represents potential additional maintenance costs, so at least make sure it doesn't stop working. Essentially, as long as more content is being added to the game, gradually more and more work is required to keep the game nice and squeaky clean, without cobwebs accumulating anywhere. When it comes to this maintenance, the greatest commitment of all when it comes to 14 is the addition of new jobs, or new playable races, with the latter being something we have to assume is no longer relevant to consider, as female Throska was delivered with the statement that no more playable races would be added. But the former, more jobs, is something that will probably always be there. A significant number of players have expressed hope that the next upcoming expansion will come with major changes to the existing jobs, many players even hoping that this dedication to polishing up the existing jobs is so great that they'd sacrifice getting any new jobs if it came to that. However, due to the value new jobs represent in making a new expansion more exciting, and the fact that 14 has never released an expansion without new jobs added, we can almost guarantee already now that this pile of combat jobs will still increase with 8.0. Did you know that Summoner, Scholar, and Ninja are all new A Realm Reborn jobs? And so, with the cost concerns raised when it came to Forked Tower of the Occult Crescent, with the hollowing out of quantity of dungeon content, and various other things that feel sort of left behind or forgotten. I have a whole separate video on that topic too. And now the addition of a new limited job being accompanied by the existing limited job missing out on additions in the specific patch that traditionally it has normally received additions in, which itself can of course make players more wary of getting too invested in Beastmaster, lest it also gets left behind when something newer is added. With all of these observations in mind, what do you think? Have you ever gotten invested into some side content only to find that it feels abandoned and then lost interest? Or maybe you have found some of these niches and think that 14 is the perfect place for things like this. Admittedly, a lot of the niches in 14 work because it is built on something, and that something could be 14 and is. I know this video perhaps got a bit rambly and a bit unfocused here and there, but I did find it humorous to make a video spread its own attention too thin about a game spreading itself too thin. I would, just the same, still love to hear your thoughts on this topic, and also how excited you have been for Beastmaster all this time we have waited. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi, links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, while Paladin released into A Realm Reborn with Rampart, Sentinel, Hallowed Ground, and functional blocking, Warrior had none of those things, let alone a reliable, proper defensive cooldown. Holmgang didn't even stop you from dying, and Rampart was borrowed from Paladin. In hindsight, the two job designers probably may have benefited from communicating a bit more in the process, which is also a funny callback to a large part of the 1.0 development problems. Communication.